All right, let's get into it. Today, we are taking a journey into what is, without a doubt, the most complicated and incredible machine we know of, our own nervous system. We're going to go from the absolute smallest scale, a single electrical spark, all the way up to the grand design of the brain itself. So, it really all boils down to this one question. I mean, think about it for a second. Every single thing that makes you, you, every memory, every feeling, every single decision, even just the awareness that you're listening to this right now, it's all born from these tiny, tiny electrical signals. How on earth does that work? Well, that's the amazing mystery we're going to start to unravel. To understand a system this massive, you've got to start with the absolute basics, the fundamental unit. So, let's meet the star of the show, the neuron, and its incredibly important but often forgotten support crew. And here it is, the neuron. This is our messenger. You have something like 86 billion of these in your head, all woven together into a network that is just mind-bogglingly complex. These are the cells that are doing the heavy lifting, processing and zipping information around for literally everything your body does. You know what's so cool is that a neuron's shape is perfectly built for its job. The dendrites, they're like these little antennas, just listening and picking up signals from their neighbors. All those signals get funneled to the cell body, the soma, which is kind of like the central processor. It adds everything up, and if the message is important enough, whoosh, the axon fires that signal on down the line, kind of like a biological wire. But here's the thing, neurons can't do it alone. They have this massive support team called glial cells. So if neurons are the rock stars sending out all the messages, the glial cells are the roadies doing all the essential work behind the scenes. They clean up junk, they provide the physical structure, they create this fatty insulation called myelins that makes signals travel way faster, and they even act as the brain's own private immune system. In fact, you have more glial cells than neurons. They're absolutely crucial. Okay, so we've met the players. Now let's get to the action itself. How does one of these little neurons actually create that electrical spark we keep talking about? This is where it gets really good. So before a neuron can fire, it's got to be in a ready state. This is called its resting potential. It works really hard to keep the inside of the cell electrically negative compared to the outside, about negative 70 millivolts. Just think of it like a bow and arrow that's been pulled back. It's just sitting there holding all this potential energy, just waiting for the signal to let go. And here's that signal. The action potential is this beautiful, incredibly fast chain reaction. First up, depolarization. Tiny gates in the cell membrane fly open, and a flood of positive sodium ions rushes in, completely flipping the charge from negative to positive. Right after that, bam! Repolarization. Different gates open and positive potassium ions rush out, bringing the charge back down to negative. It briefly overshoots, that's hyperpolarization, before this little molecular machine, the sodium-potassium pump, kicks in and gets everything perfectly back to its resting state. The whole thing is an all-or-nothing event that races down the axon in milliseconds. Now, having one neuron fire is one thing, but the whole point is for it to communicate with the next neuron in the chain. And you may think it just zaps it with electricity, but nope. The system is actually way more elegant. It uses a kind of chemical handshake. This handshake happens across a tiny, tiny little space called the synapse. And this is a wild detail. Neurons don't physically touch each other. There's always this little gap. And they send messages across that gap using special chemical messengers. It's an incredibly precise process. So here's how it goes down. The electrical signal, that action potential, zips down to the very end of the neuron. Its arrival triggers the release of these little chemical packets called neurotransmitters. They float across that tiny synaptic gap and then lock into special receptors on the next neuron, just like a key fitting into a lock. And that connection tells the next neuron what to do, either get excited and fire its own signal or stay quiet and be inhibited. So in a flash, the message goes from electrical to chemical and then right back to electrical. Just amazing. Okay, but obviously you can't just leave those chemicals hanging out in the gap, right? The signal would just keep going and going forever. So the system has these two brilliant cleanup strategies. One is called reuptake. The first neuron literally sucks the neurotransmitters back up to be recycled. The other is enzymatic degradation, where special proteins just swoop in and break the messengers down. It's incredibly tidy and efficient. Okay, so we've been looking through a microscope at how one neuron talks to another. Now, let's pull the camera way, way back. How do trillions of these tiny conversations organize themselves into the huge, sprawling network of our nervous system? Well, first, the whole system is split into two big parts. You've got the central nervous system, or CNS, that's the brain and the spinal cord. Think of it as the command center, the headquarters, where all the information is processed and all the big decisions get made. And then you have the peripheral nervous system, the PNS. These are all the network cables, all the nerves that branch out from the center, carrying sensory info into HQ, and then carrying motor commands back out to every part of your body. And if we zoom in on that command center, the brain, we see it's organized into sections too. You can almost think about it in layers of evolution. The hindbrain is the oldest, most basic part. It handles stuff you never think about, like breathing and balance. The midbrain is kind of a relay station, helping to process sensory information. And then you have the forebrain, which includes the huge cerebral cortex. This is the newest part, evolutionarily speaking, and it's where all our complex, higher-level stuff happens: our thoughts, our planning, our personality.
So how does the brain, which is split into two halves, a left and right hemisphere, talk to itself? It does it through this absolute beast of a structure, the corpus callosum. It's this dense bundle of about 200 million nerve fibers. That's not just a bridge, it's an information superhighway that makes sure both sides of your brain are constantly in sync and working as a single unified team.
Now, you'd imagine that for a system this critical and this fragile, it would need to be really, really well protected. And you would be right. The body has built an incredibly sophisticated, multi-layered fortress to keep our central command safe. The layers of defense are just amazing. First, you've got the obvious one, the hard bone of your skull and your spine. Tucked just inside that are three tough, protective membranes called the meninges. Then, the brain and spinal cord are literally floating in something called cerebrospinal fluid, which acts as a liquid cushion, a shock absorber. But maybe the most impressive layer of security is the one you can't even see. It's called the blood-brain barrier, and it's basically a microscopic security gate. It's made of very specialized cells that line the blood vessels in the brain, and they are extremely picky. They let the good stuff in, like oxygen and sugar, but they block out toxins, bacteria, and a whole lot of other junk that could mess with the brain's delicate chemical balance. It's a phenomenal piece of biological engineering. And so that brings us right back to where we started. We've seen how a single tiny spark in one cell leads to a chemical handshake across a gap, which, when repeated trillions of times, builds a vast, interconnected, and heavily guarded network. And it's that system, from the bottom all the way to the top, that constructs every single moment of our reality. So that leaves us with one last big, fascinating question to ponder. If our entire experience of the world is built out of these carefully managed electrical and chemical signals, what happens to our reality when those signals get changed? What happens when they're disrupted or blocked or even enhanced? It's something to think about for sure.